Good evening, everybody. Breaking news tonight. President Trump has announced that General H.R. McMaster is out as National Security Advisor and will be replaced by former United Nations Ambassador John Bolton. The announcement comes after weeks of tension between the president and McMaster. President Trump today said McMaster will stay on until mid-April to assure a smooth transition. A lot more on that story coming up here tonight. Also tonight, the RINO congressional leadership today telling the American people to go to hell, and the markets didn't like it one bit. The House of Representatives passed a $1.3 trillion spending bill, better known as the Schumer-Pelosi-Ryan McConnell special, packed with Democratic priorities with no regard to the resulting crush of deficits and debt. The markets plunged. The Dow sold off more than 700 points, $750 billion in market cap lost on the day. The pathetic reporting of the left-wing national media blaming everything from the resignation of President Trump's attorney to the tariffs the president is imposing on China and other exporters to the United States as they fill their corporations and vaults and treasuries with American dollars. The president today ordered tariffs on some $50 billion of Chinese imports, in part for its massive overcapacity in manufacturing steel and aluminum and its theft of American intellectual property, whether stealing military secrets or our most advanced technology. And a major shakeup in the president's legal team as well. As I said, John Dowd resigning as the lead attorney for the special counsel investigation. There may have been disagreements between Dowd and his client, the president. Dowd was opposed to a Trump-Mueller interview. And just hours after Dowd resigned, President Trump told reporters once again he would like to sit down with Mueller. We take all of that up here tonight and much more. Our guests include Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross on the president's America First trade policy and the new tariffs. Former CIA analyst Fred Fleitz on the national security team shakeup, his former boss, none other than Ambassador John Bolton. And political savant Ed Rollins on the RINO leadership's decision to sell out the American people. Fox News legal analyst Greg Jarrett and the Washington Examiner's Byron York on the Mueller witch hunt and the president's rapidly improving legal team. Our top story tonight, the newest Trump administration shakeup. National Security Advisor General H.R. McMaster is leaving the White House. The president announced on Twitter, quote, "I am pleased to announce that effective April 9th, Ambassador John Bolton will be my new National Security Advisor. I'm very thankful for the service of General H.R. McMaster, who's done an outstanding job and will always remain my friend." There will be an official contact handover on April 9. Our first guest tonight was Ambassador Bolton's chief of staff during his time as ambassador to the United Nations. Fred Fleitz joins us tonight. Fred, good to have you with us.
Good to be here, Lou.
This is a friend of mine put it, a great day for the America and as well for the president.
It is a great day. John Bolton is a friend. I supported him as an intelligence officer on 2 occasions. I was actually his chief of staff when he was Undersecretary of State for Arms Control, and I can tell you he has a brilliant strategic mind. He is fully supportive of the president's agenda, but he is not a yes man. He will give the president his frank advice. But you know what, Lou? That advice is not going to leak to the press. He understands the government bureaucracy, which is why the left hates him so much. But most important, Lou, he's a nice guy. Yeah. He was a pleasure to work for, and I can tell you the people who worked for him are intensely loyal, and they are all celebrating tonight.
Yeah, I think anyone who knows John Bolton is celebrating because of his intellect, his capacity, his experience, his talent. And I said here last night, one of the things I think that's incumbent upon any national security advisor is to take responsibility for his team, for their loyalty, for their integrity, their discretion. And I think anyone, the national security team has been leaking like a sieve from that White House. And McMaster could never control it. And John Bolton, will he be able to control it?
I think so. I mean, John really does understand government bureaucracy. He understands how to get the job done. And I don't want to speak for how he's going to manage the National Security Council. I haven't discussed it with him. But based on the way he conducted himself as Undersecretary of State at the State Department for Arms Control and as UN Ambassador, he knows how to use personnel to accomplish the agenda of the President, the agenda of the administration, and we really need someone like that in the National Security Council right now.
Yeah, we definitely do. The President is, everyone is trying to put this on the President. The people who are leaking, the people who are disloyal to, egregiously disloyal, leaking national security secrets. This has to stop, and I think John Brennan is an example of exactly the kind of person who, think about this, John Brennan, the former CIA director, is leaking every day. Still, this is a man, I just can't even imagine a more contemptible human being, frankly, in government service, unless it's Comey, unless it's Clapper, because they have created a politicized intelligence organization that is continuing to operate post their service to the country.
And it's not just the leaks. It's these vicious attacks by John Brennan against President Trump that have been constant. Every time he opens his mouth, he confirms the worst assumptions by CIA's critics, that it is thoroughly politicized and out to undermine the president. I can tell you, most intelligence officers are not political. Many of them are heroes who risk their lives to protect our security. But John Brennan is debasing everything that they do. I want John Brennan to shut up and go away.
It strikes me, though, that these are the people who are responsible for much of what was wrong with the Obama years. They served blindly a president who really wasn't exactly focused on the national interest, but seemed to be on the interest of Iran, of Russia. People talk about collusion. It's 8 years of collusion by President Obama and his administration and his intelligence apparatus led by Comey and Brennan and Clapper. It's awful.
Intelligence officers were very frustrated during the Obama years, and they knew they had nowhere to go to bring whistleblowing complaints about politicization of intelligence. You've heard the reports about how reports of the threats from ISIS were watered down within the intelligence community during the Obama years.
CENTCOM was involved in the whole mess.
There was nowhere for these people to go, and there was other instances of politicization of CIA analysis of the Iran deal.
Where was there not politicization in the Obama years? What department? What agency? What intelligence agency?
Well, I'll tell you that
it seemed to overwhelm the entire federal government.
Behind the scenes, there were many CIA officers who basically they pushed through the best they could to get the objective analysis. The problem is people like Brennan would water it down and then not show it to senior officials.
Fred, you're thrilled that Ambassador John Bolton will be the new National Security Advisor. I know that we all join in wishing him the very best in his new assignment. It couldn't be more important. We thank you for being with us, Fred.
Good to be here. Thanks, Lou.
Fred Fleitz. Ambassador Bolton will be on Kennedy tonight following this broadcast. And turning to the RINO congressional leadership's massive insult now to the American people. The Ditch Mitch and Dump Ryan movement got another shot in the arm today as Republican leadership sided with the Democratic leadership to rush through a $1.3 trillion spending bill. Fox News chief congressional correspondent Mike Emanuel on Capitol Hill now with our report.
Both the yeas are 256, the nays are 167.
Facing a Friday night deadline, the House has sent a $1.3 trillion government funding package to the Senate for consideration after this pitch from the House Speaker.
Vote yes for our military. Vote yes for the safety and the security of this country. Vote yes.
The spending package includes almost $655 billion for national defense, nearly $48 billion for homeland security, $21 billion for infrastructure projects, and almost $1.6 billion for barriers and technology on the border. There was plenty of support from Democrats since it is a bipartisan compromise, but the House Democratic whip hammered the GOP for voting on it before anyone had read the more than 2,200-page bill.
As I said, nobody's read that either. This is report language. come to the well if you've read this language.
In a last-ditch effort, the Conservative Freedom Caucus applied pressure from the right, appealing to President Trump to stop the spending package.
Put a good bill in front of the president. He'd support that, too. I know he would. So let's put good legislation in front. Let's not bring the worst bill I have seen in my 10 years in Congress to the floor of the House.
The White House swiftly shut down that argument.
Is the president going to sign the bill? The answer is yes. Why? Because it funds his priorities.
Part of the Senate Majority Leader's pitch for support are components addressing background checks and school safety.
This bill will include two important bipartisan common sense measures to address real issues facing the nation: the FOXNews bill and the Stop School Violence Act.
As for when the Senate might send it to the president,
that depends. One person, as you know, can shut the place down if they want to. So it's really up to our members.
Once this measure reaches the president's desk for his signature, it would end the recent pattern of funding the government a few weeks at a time. Lou?
Mike, thank you very much. Mike Emanuel reporting. House Judiciary Committee Chairman Bob Goodlatte finally decided to subpoena the Justice Department. It took him 4 months. He's seeking documents regarding charging decisions in the investigation of Hillary Clinton's private email server, potential abuses of the FISA Act, and the FBI's Office of Professional Responsibility recommendation to fire former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe. Joining us tonight, former Reagan White House political director, Great America PAC chairman, Fox Business political analyst, Ed Rollins.
Thank you.
And I would say the country's smartest political analyst every time.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be with you.
Thank you. Great to have you here, and it's great to see you. John Bolton.
I'm all for it. John is a great American. John, I had the privilege of serving with John in the Reagan administration. There's no better professional anywhere. And the key thing that most people don't understand, the National Security Advisor is not about the smartest guy in the room, although John would be. He's the person who brings the state and defense and CIA that information and basically make sure it's balanced and the president gets the best information possible. John will do that. And John will do it in a way that he's worked for a lot of very capable people, presidents. And I think to a certain extent, this president will be very, very well served by him.
You know, another thing about John, if I may say, who, you know, obviously we are all friends of his and we are pulling for him all the way. But one of the things about John is he never bores you. He is a man who means to make words dance, and he means what he says. And what a delight to have, whether it's on television or whether it is in government.
He's a great analyst. He basically understands all elements of the foreign policy arena, which is complicated, and my sense is he will bring to the president, he'll get what the president wants. McMaster's bored the president, talked about too many things, and this has been going on for months and months and months. John will find out what the president wants, and he'll make sure he gets that information so that he can make this, so that the president can make the decision, not John Bolton make the decision. So I think it's going to be a major appointment, and it's going to be very critical.
And the president being well served with this,
absolutely,
with his choice. Let's turn to the spending bill, $1.3 trillion. We did a little math on it. It turns out it turns fiscal policy in this country upside down. It's stunning, the irresponsibility of the Republican leadership. They huddled with the two Democrats, Pelosi and Schumer. You would think that this is Obamacare 2 instead of a spending bill.
Well, when Nancy Pelosi said this was a tremendous victory for the American people, one that keeps domestic agencies robustly funded while turning away Trump's push for more border wall and immigration enforcement money. That in itself ought to be enough to...
Well, that's Ryan slapping the president right in the face because he refused to fund the wall. The money that was put forward in that spending bill isn't even for a wall.
Well, it's like you want to build a house and they give you enough money to put carpeting in your garage. I mean, and this was all the president's priorities in this bill got pushed aside, other than defense. The defense was critical to him, and obviously it's a good defense bill. It's a terrible...
The military gets, and that was of overriding importance to President Trump, without question. But the damn shame is it wasn't of overriding importance to Pelosi, to Schumer, or the Democratic Party.
And I'm appalled again by the process. We draft a 2,232 page bill, not word bill, and get it done There's not a single member has read this bill. There's a bunch of staff people who basically put different pieces into this thing, and we're halfway through the year already, and basically this is the best that we can do. The process does not work. This will be the last major piece of legislation these guys will pass, and it's just appalling.
I want to turn to the private sector real quickly because it's going to involve the public sector very soon. It appears right now that technology is about to go through a tsunami of regulation that they never thought possible. Mark Zuckerberg saying that he would be okay with regulation of Facebook. Whether he's okay with it or not, he's proven himself to be an absolute bereft of any leadership qualities and frankly, very few principles. He has exposed his company through his ham-handed management and that of his top officials in breaching the public trust. I mean, he has handed his company into the jaw of regulation.
Well, they don't know what's coming because once the government gets in the regulatory business, it's unbelievable. But it's their fault, as you say. There's been an arrogance out of the technical industry. The Silicon Valley group all thought they were smarter than everybody else.
Well, not only did they think they're smarter, they decided that they were going to carry out what is effectively a social utility.
Right.
And at the same time, they would decide who could be on their social utility, what they could say, and they would be the arbiter of what was decent, civilized, and appropriate language and views and values. The hell with these people.
Well, equally as important, taking the access to the privacy of thoughts and documents that people have and put on that and selling it as they have done or allowing it to get used as they have in a political way. They're the ones that ought to be dragged before. Yeah. They're the ones that had collusion with Russia, if anybody else. So
as I pointed out at the outset,
yeah, right.
There are only two people that actually we know were colluding with Russia. They were Facebook and they were Twitter.
Right.
And that's still the fact right now. Ed Rollins.
Thank you.
Great to see you, partner.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Ed Rollins. Be sure to vote in our poll tonight. The question is, do you believe RINOs Ryan and McConnell would rather bankrupt the nation than stand up to the establishment, deep state, and Dems to stop runaway government spending, deficits, and debt? Cast your vote on Twitter at Lou Dobbs. Follow me on Twitter at Lou Dobbs. Like me on Facebook. Follow me on Instagram at Lou Dobbs Tonight. And on Wall Street, stocks selling off and selling off hugely. The House Intelligence Committee today formally ended its Russia investigation, voting along party lines to release its final report. A summary of the findings assert that there was no evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia, that the Obama administration's post-election response was insufficient, and a finding that former Director of National Intelligence James Clapper provided inconsistent testimony to the committee about his contacts with the media, including CNN, for whom he now works. The full report will be released to the public pending a classification review by the intelligence community. Joining me now, Byron York, Chief Political Correspondent for the Washington Examiner, Fox Business contributor. Byron, great to see you.
Hello.
And as I said earlier, no one has done a better job than you in covering this story in its breadth and its depth. Where we are now, it seems, is we have a special counsel that is sort of a smoldering ruin of what it was intended to be, and it is just simply a nuisance, a public nuisance, without having produced anything for the public interest.
Well, a couple of things. One, I think there's a few more things in this House Intelligence report. And today what they did was they released a bunch of findings, one-sentence findings, but a bunch of them from their report. They also said that Donald Trump's business history did not have anything to do, that they could tell, with any sort of relations with Russia or any sort of collusion, which they said did not exist. Really interesting, that Clapper part you mentioned, because remember what happened. The intelligence community assessment was done by the end of 2016. The intel chiefs went to brief President Obama on it on January 5th, and then the next day they went to brief President Trump on it, President-elect Trump. And that was the meeting where 3 of the chiefs left after they briefed him on the intelligence community assessment. And James Comey stayed there to talk to Trump one-on-one about the dossier and the salacious allegations and the kinky sex in Moscow and all of this stuff. This was their one-on-one meeting. And amazingly enough, it got leaked a few days later, and apparently the House Intelligence Committee believes that James Clapper may have been involved in that leak.
James Clapper and James Comey, as the instrument of whatever purpose, that briefing gave it a standing that then could be leaked. There's all sorts of questions about who was responsible for what, and I suspect we're going to have questions for some time. But it is just awful what is happening in this country, and frankly what the Democratic Party has become and what the deep state has become. We're also looking at the very real possibility that that we're incapable now in the media of asking the appropriate questions. Why did no one, it seems no one at all, ask in 2016, how is it that all of our intelligence agencies could agree on this one fact about meddling by the Russians, but the FBI never personally, individually, up close and personally, investigated the servers of the DNC? No one questioned why there was not a scintilla of evidence produced by all of these 16 intelligence agencies who, quote unquote, agreed on everything, but had not one whit of evidence to support their concurrence.
Couple of things. On the Hillary Clinton email investigation, it was worse than you just said, and certainly worse than we knew at the time, because remember, they interviewed Hillary Clinton, the FBI did, on January 2nd. That was the January 4th weekend, and then on January 5th, James Comey comes out and exonerates her, and we only learned not too long ago that Comey began writing the exoneration memo in late April or early May. Not only before Hillary Clinton was interviewed, but before 15 or 16 other witnesses, some of them very important witnesses, were interviewed. So it's just striking the way that they created this sort of pre-exoneration and then played it out for public consumption. Now, on the Mueller thing, you have to remember, what's interesting here is Mueller has charged a number of people who were very close, high-ranking people in the administration: Manafort, Flynn, Gates. There are people who would have been involved in collusion had such a scheme existed, and yet they've been charged with other things.
If I may just say, in the campaign.
Right, and they've been charged with other things, but nothing that involves any hint of collusion or coordination or conspiracy or whatever it's called. So that's leading a lot of people to believe that Mueller really is not going to do anything on that. And then it all becomes about obstruction of justice. And remember, as far as Donald Trump's argument is, they're trying to go after me for obstructing an investigation into something that didn't happen. That's going to be a very powerful political argument for the president.
A powerful one, and you would think that the president would not have to make that argument solely. You would think that the leading lights of the Capitol Hill, Mitch McConnell, Speaker Ryan, would have the guts, the integrity to stand up and say this is enough and it's got to end now. Wouldn't you think?
Well, you're right to bring up the members of Congress, because the president is not going to be charged with some crime and have to go to court over it. If it comes to it, he would be impeached if there's a Democratic House of Representatives.
Well, it's now it appears that Ryan and McConnell want him impeached. They're doing everything they can, it seems to me, with this irresponsible bill, $1.3 trillion that's turned fiscal policy upside down and which set off the markets today. They're trying to dislodge this president, and it's just fine with them if they lose their majorities in both houses to do it. It seems that could only be their purpose.
Well, you can certainly make the argument that business as usual is their purpose. And if you look at this bill, I mean, not only is there not $25 billion for wall funding, there's something like $1.8 billion. Won't get very much done at all. By the way, it also
and it's
does
not for
things.
A wall. It's not for a wall, though.
For
there's not
border
one
security.
dime.
It also does things like reduce the number of ICE detention beds, which makes it more likely that catch and release will expand under Donald Trump instead of shrink under Donald Trump. Certainly not what the president promised during the campaign of 2016.
And right now, no ready way in which to hold accountable Messrs. McConnell and Ryan.
Oh, they're still rushing to pass it as we speak.
I beg your pardon?
They're still rushing to pass it as we speak.
Yeah, they want that 2-week vacation, all of it. Byron York, great to see you. Thank
you, Lou.
President Trump defending American jobs and industry, getting tough on China.
We're doing things for this country that should have been done for many, many years. We've had this abuse by many other countries and groups of countries that were put together in order to take advantage of the United States, and we don't want that to happen. We're not going to let that happen.
Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross takes up the Trump tariffs. Here next. Stay with us. We're coming right back. The White House today getting tough on China, announcing $50 billion of tariffs and restrictions on technology deals. President Trump addressing a massive problem that's plagued American workers and industry for a very long time. The trade deficit with China stands at $337 billion. We haven't seen a surplus since 1980. And every year, China robs the United States of $600 billion in intellectual property. $600 billion. Joining me tonight, Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross. Mr. Secretary, good to have you with us. This is extraordinary. The president has said from the time he began campaigning for the office that he was going to do precisely what his administration did today. And then we have a number of wags in the political and economic press trying to say, oh my gosh, it upset the markets. There was no surprise here. It has been telegraphed for a very long time. What do you make of it?
Well, the same people who said that the new normal, which I called the new dismal, was that we could only grow at 1.5%, and the president proved them wrong. Then they said, well, you'll never get a real tax bill through with big tax reductions, and the president proved them wrong. Now comes trade, and my guess is the president will prove them wrong again.
Yeah, I think your guess is well-founded. When we look at this, people talk about they're worried about a trade war. I think it is one of the most asinine things I hear in the national left-wing media. We have been in a trade war in this country for decades. We've just had a target on our backs throughout. We have been the designated target for global for the global markets and international trading partners from Jump Street. It's just now that the United States is showing the principle and the backbone to fight, and that's because President Trump is in the White House.
Well, and he, as you know, takes his promises very, very seriously, and he has a repeated history of honoring them. Today was just another chapter in that regard.
And where do we go here? The intellectual property theft has been ranked of over 3,000. We know there have been over 3,000 front companies from China operating in this country for literally decades. We know that those companies have been stealing. We know that they have university students, whether they're in doctorate programs or whatever they may be, whose purpose is to steal in academia. And to move that treasure trove of a knowledge base back to the mainland. At what point can we bring that under control?
Well, if you look at the two actions that we've taken very recently, the two 232s on steel and aluminum, those deal with the present. The intellectual property action that was taken today really deals with our future. And I think that's what makes this an interesting and very balanced package. I learned to my amazement the other day, we will be granting at the U.S. Patent Office, part of Commerce, our 10 millionth patent sometime around the middle of this year. No country has ever had 10 million patents, but they're only good if you make people adhere to them.
Yeah, if you protect those patents, which is the purpose of the whole thing to begin with, we have been protecting very little, and I love the idea And I'd love, as a highly successful businessman yourself, I'd love to know what your thoughts are about what American business has done to transfer all this wealth, because we blame the Chinese, we blame others, but the fault is really in ourselves, because in many cases we've allowed corporate America and U.S. multinationals to hand this over as a gift, particularly to China.
Well, that's very true. It's a lot easier on corporate America to go global than it is on Mr. and Mrs. America. For a big multinational company, whether they open a factory in Missouri or they open it in Wuhan, China, it's really not much different. But it leaves Mr. and Mrs. America behind. And Mr. and Mrs. America is who the president is really trying to defend.
Absolutely. Wilbur Ross, thank you very much for being with us. We appreciate it, Mr. Secretary. Wish you all the best.
Thank you, Lou. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. A huge market sell-off today, and the national left-wing media's mendacious mediocrities who cover politics or business and economics ignored the unpleasant real causes of the sell-off and instead quickly embraced the conveniently anti-Trump narrative, peddling more nonsense about fears of a trade war that would result from the president's imposition of tariffs on imported steel and aluminum that's been dumped in the United States below cost for years. You know, the tariffs that the president has promised since he began running for the presidency in 2015. The know-nothings of the national left-wing media are incapable of understanding that the United States has been the designated global victim of global trade wars for decades. Again, were it not for President Trump, we would remain the perpetual victim, transferring our wealth to the world as we've done for decades, and our squandering of American riches would go on until the last bite was ripped from our carcass. So what were markets and investors reacting to? Certainly the Fed's poorly reasoned decision to raise interest rates weighed on the markets. Where is the inflation? Why act now? And why, when the result is to raise the cost of debt at even the Fed itself, not a brilliant stroke by the new Fed chair, nor was it in any way a responsible act. But look to Capitol Hill for the principal cause of the day's big sell-off. The House passing that massive $1.3 trillion spending bill. RINOS, Ryan, and McConnell giving House members a whole 17 hours to read the 2,000-page bill. None did, I'm sure. Ryan and McConnell huddled with two Dem leaders by the name of Schumer and Pelosi. And the Dem duo didn't hesitate to claim victory, because victory it was over the majority GOP leaders.
In a certain sense, we're able to accomplish more in the minority than we were when we had the presidency or even were in the majority.
Well, I think one of the reasons they rushed it through, they didn't want their Republican colleagues to see just exactly what was in the bill.
That's as close to truth as I've ever heard either Schumer or Pelosi speak. How about you? The Republican leaders didn't want the American people to realize they were funding sanctuary cities, Planned Parenthood, including infrastructure funding that could be used for Schumer's Gateway Tunnel in the Northeast Corridor. And instead of giving President Trump his wall, replacing existing border fencing, and in so doing blew up fiscal policy to the tune of $1.3 trillion. The budget will add an estimated $1.7 trillion to the federal debt over the next decade. And we'll see trillion-dollar deficits every year going forward. Every single year. McConnell and Ryan have joined the resistance and the deep state. And the Republicans have only Ryan and McConnell to blame. And, of course, themselves. Our quotation of the evening. We thought Tennessee Williams ought to be trotted out for this evening. We have to distrust each other. It is only our only defense against betrayal. A huge market sell-off today, and the national left-wing media's mendacious mediocrities who cover politics or business and economics ignored the unpleasant real causes of the sell-off and instead quickly embraced the conveniently anti-Trump narrative, peddling more nonsense about fears of a trade war that would result from the president's imposition of tariffs on imported steel and aluminum that's been dumped in the United States below cost for years. You know, the tariffs that the president has promised since he began running for the presidency in 2015. The know-nothings of the national left-wing media are incapable of understanding that the United States has been the designated global victim of global trade wars for decades. Again, were it not for President Trump, we would remain the perpetual victim, transferring our wealth to the world as we've done for decades, and our squandering of American riches would go on until the last bite was ripped from our carcass. So what were markets and investors reacting to? Certainly the Fed's poorly reasoned decision to raise interest rates weighed on the markets. Where is the inflation? Why act now? And why, when the result is to raise the cost of debt at even the Fed itself, not a brilliant stroke by the new Fed chair, nor was it in any way a responsible act. But look to Capitol Hill for the principal cause of the day's big sell-off. The House passing that massive $1.3 trillion spending bill. RINOS, Ryan, and McConnell giving House members a whole 17 hours to read the 2,000-page bill. None did, I'm sure. Ryan and McConnell huddled with two Dem leaders by the name of Schumer and Pelosi. And the Dem duo didn't hesitate to claim victory, because victory it was over the majority GOP leaders.
In a certain sense, we're able to accomplish more in the minority than we were when we had the presidency or even were in the majority.
Well, I think one of the reasons they rushed it through, they didn't want their Republican colleagues to see just exactly what was in the bill.
That's as close to truth as I've ever heard either Schumer or Pelosi speak. How about you? The Republican leaders didn't want the American people to realize they were funding sanctuary cities, Planned Parenthood, including infrastructure funding that could be used for Schumer's Gateway Tunnel in the Northeast Corridor. And instead of giving President Trump his wall, replacing existing border fencing, and in so doing blew up fiscal policy to the tune of $1.3 trillion. The budget will add an estimated $1.7 trillion to the federal debt over the next decade. And we'll see trillion-dollar deficits every year going forward. Every single year. McConnell and Ryan have joined the resistance and the deep state. And the Republicans have only Ryan and McConnell to blame. And, of course, themselves. Our quotation of the evening. We thought Tennessee Williams ought to be trotted out for this evening. We have to distrust each other. It is only our only defense against betrayal. John Dowd resigned as President Trump's lead counsel in the Russia investigation. Dowd's exit follows the president's decision to hire veteran Washington attorney Joseph DeGenova. And I did it again, DeGenova. I'm going to say it right, Joe, no matter what it takes me. I apologize. DeGenova's wife and law partner Victoria Tensing also joining Trump's legal team today. I have butchered both of their names for a very long time. The president earlier addressing the possibility of speaking to special counsel Robert Mueller.
Thank you very much. Would you like to testify to special counsel Robert Mueller, sir? Thank you.
Joining me now, Fox News legal analyst Greg Jarrett. Greg, great to have you here.
Good to see you, Lou.
This is fascinating. Victoria Tensing joining the team. Her husband was already on. This is, I think, just a remarkable elevation of the talent helping the president.
Well, there are two great former federal prosecutors. Joe, as you know, was a former independent counsel, so this is right up his alley. John Dowd was a fine lawyer, but you need somebody who's schooled in how to deal with a special counsel, especially when Mueller says, I want to talk to President Trump in a room under oath.
Yeah, absolutely. And what do you think?
Don't do it. It's a perjury trap and all kinds of other traps because Mueller has proven he cannot be trusted. He doesn't care about the integrity of the process or its fairness. So if I were Joe, I suspect what he would say to Mueller is, well, the president would be willing to talk to you about crimes, but what crimes? Collusion's not a crime in any criminal statute in a political campaign, so that's out. Obstruction of justice, the president's constitutionally authorized to fire the FBI director for a reason or no reason at all, and he was given a reason by the deputy AG and the AG himself for malfeasance in the Hillary Clinton email case. So I'll talk to you, but you don't have a crime for us to talk about.
Why isn't there at least sufficient integrity within Robert Mueller himself and his team of attorneys to say, you know, we've been at this almost a year. No evidence. The House Intelligence Committee found nothing, absolutely nothing. And the Senate Intelligence Committee has simply embarrassed itself because Richard Burr, Senator Burr, the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, has acknowledged they found not one shred of evidence. There are, as he put it one day, no preliminary findings because we found nothing. Yet Mark Warner runs the committee as if it were his. It's embarrassing to watch this process. It is partisan and it is putrid.
And in fact, in May of last year, it was Burr himself who posed the ultimate question to James Comey, who was testifying. Did the president ever ask you to stop the Russian investigation? And Comey said no. And you'd think that Burr could snap out of the cloud he's in and step up and say there's no evidence of collusion, there's no evidence of obstruction, period.
It took Bob Goodlatte, the chair of the House Judiciary Committee, it took him 4 months to write a letter to say, you remember our request for documents, for information? I mean, he and Trey Gowdy, both retiring, have slow walked this investigation and now suddenly have a burst of energy. I think it's just incredible to watch what we're witnessing.
They should have been slapping everybody in Washington with a subpoena, anybody connected with this travesty of our legal system. You know, the Trump-Russia collusion hoax, allowing Hillary Clinton to, with impunity, violate the law, Comey complicit in it in clearing her, apparently for political reasons, and all of his henchmen struck Lisa Page, McCabe, who's now been fired. All of these people ought to be the target of a criminal investigation, either by the DOJ or a special counsel.
You know, oughta, woulda, coulda, maybe, but the fact is we have a passive, extraordinarily low-energy Attorney General, a man at the Deputy Attorney General spot who acts like he thinks that he's on vacation. It is an incredible lack of activity at the top of the Justice Department.
You know, Jeff Sessions recused himself out of a job, and he's incapable. And Rod Rosenstein is incredibly conflicted, as is Bob Mueller.
And Bob Mueller, one hopes, will take the hint. Greg Jarrett.
He'll never do it.
Thanks so much for being here.